Come and be welcome, my beautiful watchers, to this, my domain. For it is mine now. There were others who had claim to it once, but it is now mine. Now, to those of you who have seen some of my previous workings, you may be aware that it has been a while since my last video. This is because, unlike my foolish counterpart of Spring, I do not Twitter endlessly and inanely about projects beginning. I only summon you here, watchers, when I have something to show for it. And what I have here, partially, is the entire woodland on this side of the river, including the back of my woods. Heresy, I know. And yet, no one has stopped me from doing this. I have finished the back. But there is that, but there is also something else I have finished that I wish to show you that I think you might be interested in. A method. Not individual trees, but the method I used to build them. Because you can see earlier the ungainly puffballs, but so much better are some of the later ones. Though some of them are in their own ways ungainly, monstrous. But here in my domain, I love my monstrous trees, as well as my beautiful ones. So, we have four technically, methods of trees that I will be showcasing today. My autumnal trees, with their twisted forking branches. My little needle spires. And, of course, the pine trees in the back of this wood. And I have more than one design of the pine. There are, of course, the standard ones I have over here, all based on approximately the same method and the same sort of base. A ring of 5, a ring of 4. Not much difference. The very tiny little trees. I think I've seen one so far. Another. These are short. This view by itself is enough to showcase how they are done. And there will be one more that will be unique of its kind, unless you will get to see its entire construction. A large one, just because I cannot let the jungle stand as victor above my trees. Sure, my tree looms large and imposing over the jungle, but the smaller, tiny trees still need their own champion. And the thing with evergreen, it's a compromise. You can't tell whether an evergreen tree is mine or Spring's. So, thus far I have been building this particular first design of tree with a base 3 radius. At this point you can move into either one of the two directions, building up the tree and then coming back and doing the roots, or building up the roots first and then coming back and doing the tree. I believe I'm going to demonstrate first how we do the roots. Some of the root sections go up 2 blocks, some 1. If you wish to make a very large rooted tree, you could even go up 3 blocks here. And of course, you don't need to be as symmetric as I have ended up being this particular time. But a little bit of accidental symmetry doesn't generally hurt a tree. And then you just start extending the root system on out. Sometimes I put in formations like this, other times I will put in formations more like this. And of course, with the 2-block tall, you have options of how do you resolve what that block is doing. So in this case, I took and brought it on around to curve this way. In general, one of the formations that I find I like in how I construct my tree roots is to have a stretch of about 2 or 3 blocks, and then it forks into this sort of formation. And of course, anytime it goes downhill, I specifically have the roots extend. 1, because going further down allows you to see more of the root structure, and 2, because I just do not like exposed dirt blocks when I could have grass. And of course, we have here an asymmetric root structure, with most of the roots being heavily on this side of the tree, and very few of them on this side. I think that means then, if I were to have this particular tree be weathered or beaten over in a specific direction, it may be leaning that way, needing the extra root structure to hold it in place, or it could be leaning that way, having been blown over and having been uprooted a bit, and thus the roots on this side being missing. But since I only want to do a mild gradient on this one, I do not want to go for full twisted tree, it's going to be leaning a little bit that way. The next step when building a tree is to decide how tall do you want your tree to be. And we're going to be going with a 12 tree, so using the 1/3, 2/3 splits, 4 blocks up before the canopy. So about yay high, and we pick 2 directions for the first level to start branching out from. I'm not certain I can give a clear description of exactly what I'm doing with my branching tree branches, but one of the major things is I'm working in fences, and I want to specifically prevent any combination of branches that would produce this result. So the tree branches are always moving outwards from the trunk, and they are also always curving. We don't have straight branches. But that formation is not allowed. And at the end of a branch, putting out as much of this sort of structure as the branches will support without producing squares. And now I'm just going to pick back up some of the extra fence blocks because I don't want to be losing my fences. However, this is not actually required for the building of trees, it's just me being frugal. And scaffolding is not required for building a tree, but if you have issues trying to land on a fence block while moving its beads on your elytra, scaffolding up does probably make your building much easier. For the first ring of the tree, it doesn't matter particularly how the branches are distributed, because later rings will help smooth out the arrangement. But having a decent coverage like this never hurts. And since I decided that this particular tree was going to be leaning just a bit, when trying to make the tree lean, you bring some of the elements on across. And this is where we start pulling in our solid wood blocks. For any block where it needs to have both underside and sides have bark on it. And of course, the tree does not have to go all the way over in a single row up. In fact, having it go over in a few pieces helps sell the effect and helps allow you to make more interesting knots in your wood and tangle it in more ways than just going over by one block. Now, for the second set of branches, it's probably easiest to just go through and take the 2 corners that were missed on the first go-round. and put in another collection of branches, spiraling outwards from the trunk. And expect to find yourself going through a lot of fences using this method. And now, at this point, we go back and note, where are there gaps? Where does it feel like there really needs to be another tree branch? And normally this would be continuing upwards, but I think we actually need another branch on this, starting at this level. Though this particular branch can still end up going upwards, just by taking and having the branch have a little more of a vertical gradient to it than the usual branch on this tree. Also, a useful tip: in accessibility settings, there is this particular setting. Switching to sneak toggle instead of sneak hold allows you to easily walk around your tree branches without a risk of falling off, which is important if you're going to be building a lot of trees. And at this point, we have hit what I would say is the 2/3 mark. At this point, the trunk tapers and disappears. This is also the point at which I introduce a single block of glowstone, which is not required for building a tree, but is something I find is very helpful for maintaining a spooky atmosphere by giving that just little hint of stuff glowing in the trees in ways it shouldn't. Little fairy lights, will-o'-the-wisps. Temptations to stray off the path and walk into trouble. And also, lighting up your trees makes it easier to see the tree even when it's dark. It gives the tree a feeling of presence and lets it hold the viewer's eye at night. And that, instead of being a slab, should be another branch coming on off. However, before I start putting in the final rings of branches, it's a good idea to go through and put in the leaves on the lower rings so that you can really get a feel for where are the gaps in the light, where is there a spot that hasn't been adequately blocked off by branches already. Because, of course, the tree doesn't really want all of its leaves to be blocking the same exact path of light between the tree and the ground. The leaves should get as much light as the tree can give them. Though upper branches will, of course, start cutting into how much light the lower branches get. But if you put in the leaf blocks of the lower branches before you commit to the upper tiers of branches, it helps a lot for figuring out where there is space wanting and where there is not space for a new branch. And at this point, go nuts, covering your wild little tree branches with leaves. And of course, once you have put in that glowstone, the glowstone itself should be covered with enough leaves that it isn't glaringly obvious. There should be no straight lines to see the glowstone without seeing it through at least one block of leaves. The lighting is not inexplicable if you can in fact see where it's coming from. And having put in those branches below, we can definitely see a couple spots of negative space where more branches could fit. For instance, we take one of the branches and go on over this way to fit into this hollow space. And at this point, we want to go about 4 blocks up on just branches curving off from our, I would call it our central trunk, but at this point there is no trunk to it. And your branches do not have to attach to the trunk smoothly. While it does make things much more convenient and make it look much more realistic, creating a formation like as I have created here is still a valid form of how the branches come together, and that was an accidental placement of the fence going down, but a few little accidents really help sell the organic chaos of real branches compared to simply a simulacra of a tree. Now, this particular design of tree can be scaled up relatively easily, and even if it's not, if you're looming over the small, mundane trees that you would find in other biomes, a tree like this can definitely feel like it's got a history to it. It's gnarled and weathered and weird in ways an ordinary mundane tree can never hope to match. And so if you are trying to go for a spooky vibe, consider adding a few gnarled, weathered, warped, and weird trees around, say, your witch's hut. And this technique of tree, compared to some of the earlier puffballs I have created, gives a distinct feeling of individual branches curving on away. It gives a feeling of negative space between branches, while still creating enough of a puffball, enough presence. And now we set aside all of our interesting decorative blocks to head into our next tree design, which is far simpler. These little needle trees, as I call them, city cultivars, perhaps, or at least easy to make, fast and in bulk. And sometimes that's all you really want from your trees. Sometimes all you need is a wall of trees to stop prying eyes. And in which case, something like this by the banks of your river is enough. So you go up maybe 3, 5, 6 blocks, however tall you wish it to be before you start putting in your canopy level. And this is a very simple method from how I would express it. You simply continue filling with Tetris shapes. And as you go up, space them tighter. Put them more closely together. So in the beginning, we have only one side is properly building a shape at a time. But then later you will get, as you get closer to the middle of the tree, every side has its shape, and every side is in progress at the same time. We're already moving to the point where we have 2 operating together. Let's just lean into that a little. Would you still wish to leave gaps so that the original trunk can be seen? Because that helps to keep your trees a little bit weird. And be careful not to fall off, or if you do, be proficient with your Riptide Trident. And it is at this point, when it is around the height of the trees around you, that you start trailing off, making the top be only leaves. And voila! Very simple, very fast. A tree. Scatter these little matchsticks on around anywhere you need an awful lot of trees in a hurry, and are not willing to deign to lower yourself to the mere common mortal trees of a normal Minecraft world. And we will skip past this 4th type of tree, spring trees, since while they are beautiful, I have yet to find a way to use these sort of trees for evil, though adapting perhaps with a willow design into a less charming leaf pattern might allow you to create an ominous swamp feeling. But even when you take a willow tree and lean into its weeping, that still creates something that is sad, not something that is malicious. It is all too often peaceful. And so we will skip straight past it. And now for our final design of tree. Now, make sure you have enough space and pick a height where you won't interfere with the trees around you. So in this case, I want to actually go up 1 block, because each tree pulls in and out on a pattern like that. And so if it's extending just a little too far, then having the interlink. And let's do this particular tree with a radius 4, though you could, in the cases where you are constrained by other trees or the hills, have an asymmetric radius on your tree. So the side that's constrained could be radius 4, and the unconstrained side could be radius 5. This is a matter of personal preference on constructing your pine trees. Now for our lowest rings, having it be a out 3 rather than just coming in perfectly. I think somewhere along the way I have miscounted, but I will take no criticisms. Ah, that is the miscounting that has occurred. That side was only radius 3 before. Let's keep it out at radius 4. While I did say that you can go asymmetric to make it easier to deal with constraints, that side is not constrained, it is just inconvenienced. And interleaving the trees together creates a darker, more ominous canopy, even if this particular case it is not particularly dark and not particularly ominous. And now, at this point, we pull in by 2 blocks, because the next ring up will be pulled in by 1 block, and the in-between rings must be in even tighter than that. You can, if you wish the tree to be taller, have the 3 ring do 2 variants of smooth circle, and then the next line up being diamond. This both A, helps extend the tree taller, which can be useful for creating a sense of presence, and it makes the tree just slightly spikier. A diamond's shape language is harder and sharper than that of a circle's soft, kind edges. Circles are friend-shaped. Diamonds are shaped like power. But as of this point where the next ring would be constrained, we instead put the next ring up as being the start of our crown of the tree, aka the point at which the trunk no longer matters. You can put in a topper like this, or you can leave it and cut it much shorter. Now, these sort of pine trees, while they are typically thought of as Christmas pine from how much this very much looks like the sort of formation you'd get out of a Christmas tree, with the space sort of between the branches where you'd have the ornaments and then the rings of floof. Pine trees of this style, in addition to invoking holidays, can also be used to invoke dark, ominous winters, or perhaps just a row of pines up the hill. Because when you're down below, this is dark and thick and imposing. And when you're down below, looking up a hill at these teeth. Ah, hello, skeleton. Where are you? Ah, that's where it is. When you're looking at these sharp, spiky caltrops extending out of your terrain, well, it looks a little bit ominous now, doesn't it? Yeah, having several of these down the hill from a castle could be very good for creating that feeling of presence, particularly if you can arrange for the rain and thunder, and then you get the proper vibes of wandering up the path to the ominous, looming thing. But of course, it's all in how you use it. But this is your friendly reminder that trees have their own place in villainous aesthetic toolboxes. as brought to you by an ominous recolored doppelganger, which isn't quite evil, but it's close enough. And now we're getting a little bonus feature of me flexing on our neighboring jungle, because I said when this began that we needed to build our trees to be larger than the jungle next to us, and that I'm not certain that that's quite happened. So we're going to be demonstrating also what one of those pines might look like at a much larger scale. The point where I'm putting in high effort as well. Now, if I were really putting in high effort, I would go grab some spruce wood for the logs. But I have a true excess of dark oak loggage. See what this forest used to be. And frankly, is there any tree that's really hurt by using dark oak wood for it? It just looks so good, now doesn't it? And putting it this close to the wall means that my branches are going to drip well over the wall. But that might be a pro rather than a con. And while the bottom circle is 7, I think, actually, go big or go home. We're going full base 7. Lean into it. A little technique I developed when I was trying to build my mega tree for just counting to make sure that you were going up far enough. Extend the spiral up to however high and then just fill in the lower rings. And while I have made all of my other big trees be twisted, warped, I think this one is going to be ominous for how painfully sharp and jagged and straight it is. How little it has yielded in the face of the winds blowing off the sea. How little it has yielded in the face of the eldritch energies of my forest trying to warp things. And since we are going for very high effort branches, let's scatter on around a few branch starts. But we're going to have to descend to properly have the branches curved down, which is realistic, but also incredibly difficult to manage, since Minecraft is not a game that likes having things curved downwards. And at that point, it's far enough out from the ring of the tree at 4, and we're going base 7. So the bottom ring, extending out another 3 or so blocks. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And unlike the smaller pines, this one you start getting the vague, real shape of there being branches. But I think that is a feature, not a bug. And of course, we never cross the branches, so. And on this particular design of tree, we leave the branches hollow out to the end, where suddenly there is this canopy of leaves. Because one of the formations that specifically tends to turn up in real life spruce and pine is that the bottom branches don't bother having leaves until it extends out beyond the ring of the previous branches. And of course, at this point, we sing the running refrain of building trees. Need another 50 fences. And actually, since we're trying to do this in base 7, let's be more tight on the count. And not have it count up to 8. And here we move into the ring of 5, which will still go up for another 7. So around 3 or 4 blocks up is the middle ring. Well, the knot absolutely has to be where one of the branches is coming from. And of course, once we have the big rings, we will wish to fill in some of the area between the rings. And here we have my good old nighttime annoyances. So I think I will just sleep on it, and when I wake up, the entire tree will be done. 1, 2, skip a few, voila, a tree. It's slightly more diamond-shaped than I wanted, but you'll note it's a little bit wonky, a little bit weird. It's not a perfect diamond. And that's as it should be. And I think with that, we're done here. Another few trees, a demonstration of how to make them, and the update that I am still making progress. We're not dead, and we're not abandoned. So see you around, oh lovely audience.